how do we define information warfare now, is just a really opening teaser. There's remarkable perspectives on this panel when it comes to information, when it comes to information warfare, and when it comes to the idea of C4I and its ability to support that effort. We are very fortunate to have, as moderator, Lieutenant General Bob Shea. He is the President and CEO of AFCEA, and by the way, my boss, so I got to work on this one here a little bit. A lot of us in the military who have served in years past know of Bob Shea as a remarkable leader in the C4I world. He was the J6 of the Joint Staff. In his last position, had been a director or commander of a number of important command and control and C4I, both schoolhouses and actual forces, deputy commander in Japan, international experience, and recognized as a leader in the space. I can tell you that's the truth just by what I witness in terms of his respect as he meets and greets the many people who are both in industry and the military in that field. He has also been a director and advisor in industry, was in Smartronics before he came to AFCEA, where he was the executive vice president for strategic solutions. Think most about General Shea. At Christmas, he's the chairman of the board of Toys for Tots. So that's a very large enterprise activity. Great leader. He came to AFCEA about 3 years ago now, CEO and president of AFCEA. He's brought a focus in AFCEA, mission focus, to members, chapters, and partners. He has expanded the conversation on C4I and cyber in new ways to new audiences. And I can assure you he maintains an emphasis that AFCEA promotes of ethical practices, delivery of value, advancement of national security and defense interest. He's open to new ideas, and I'm certain we'll get some on this panel. This panel is only made possible by our sponsors. HPE and Intel are sponsoring this panel today. We thank them very much for that. We thank you for your attendance. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the panel and General Shea to this panel.
Thank you, Bob. You can tell I'm signing the paychecks, right? But in all seriousness, I too would like to thank HP and Intel. This is really a very interesting area and set of capabilities that our military is beginning to put together. And as again, to remind everyone, as Bob pointed out, the theme of this panel is how do we define information warfare now, which suggests that this is an evolving and emerging area of focus for the Department of Defense. And what I like to do is I kind of, as I was talking to the panel members before, I kind of borrow from the old wedding song. You know, in some regards, this is a modern take on an old good luck wedding poem where it's something old, something new, and something borrowed. And if you look at the panel, it's something blue as well, right? So this really is, in some ways, some of the concepts were established, and the thought process was established during the Cold War. It's evolving. It's evolved even further. There are new technologies and new capabilities out there. But I think as a particular interest, there's been significant emphasis on the information warfare aspect as highlighted in the CNO's Design for Maintaining Maritime Superiority and the Commandant's Marine Corps Operating Concept of 2025. And it looks at information warfare and it addresses information warfare, sometimes directly and sometimes as you read through the text of those documents, indirectly you can see the threads that go through there. And they have a good understanding for the implications of information warfare. But the art and science of information warfare is rapidly evolving. And I think if you just look at the world we're in, and one of the things that I found, I was on a Graybeard panel for a think tank that was doing a was doing a paper for one of the services on information warfare, that the views of what information warfare and information operations are kind of vary from service to service. And I think it's important as you look at how reliant we've become on technology. One of the themes that I used to carry with me was the force had the most to gain from technology, also had the most to lose if that technology was altered or modified or degraded in some manner. We've seen that China has openly tested Earth-to-space anti-satellite weapons. It's been out there in the public since 2007. You look at the Russian incursions into the Crimea, and the Ukraine has demonstrated where they've demonstrated the coordinated use of signals intelligence, electronic warfare, jamming, and accompanied that with massive artillery barrages. And that is kind of, in a lot of ways, reflective of the old, but it's being carried over into the new. The new also brings with it capabilities such as cyber, social media, and its ability to quickly rally and disperse social forces, the ability to shape and reinforce the perceptions of the news media. It brings with it misinformation, disinformation, and all that involving capabilities and threats associated with cyber, and all that encompasses. So we're coming at the topic from this panel from kind of diverse perspectives. One is we've got a joint perspective with Vice Admiral Lytle here. We've got a Department of the Navy CIO perspective with Rob. For those of you also, we have an N2 and 6 perspective in the Navy, the Director of C4 and the CIO from Marine Corps perspective. And then we've also got with Admiral Becker, we've got a view not only from an operational perspective, but we also have a view from the Acquisition Committee. So they're each going to give a brief description of information warfare from their perspective positions, and then we're going to open it up to discussions. So if I go from, just give you a brief description of the panel here so that their biographies, just hit some of the highlights because I'd like to get into the discussion because there's a lot to talk about here. Admiral Becker's operational assignments include the employment of electronic warfare, EW, as an E6 Prowler ECM officer and a weapons school instructor. He was part of the Joint Crew Composite Squadron 1, which stood up in Iraq, and you know the great work that they did with the IEDs over there. He's a member of the Aerospace Engineering Duty Officer community and a space cadre, so that's one of the things hopefully we'll get into this discussion is just how expansive is information warfare. He's also been recognized as the Department of Navy's Acquisition Professional of the Year and the Intelligence Community Major Program Manager of the Year, and he'll be stepping in to a new job here shortly, right? Sure. As Commander Spa War. Admiral Lytle comes to us from the Coast Guard, and he is the first Coast Guard officer to serve as the J6 for the Joint Staff. So you've got a real great blend there of someone who's got a Homeland Security perspective, he's got a Department of Defense perspective, and for those of you who may not know it, he was also a key staff member in the United States Cyber Command going back several years. He brings with him a lot of operational experience from a Coast Guard perspective, and he's bringing all those talents now and integrating them on the Joint Staff. Next to him is Rob Foster. Rob is the CIO for the Department of the Navy. Rob has got his operational experience in the Navy, but he also brings he's commissioned as a naval officer candidate. He brings some of that experience to him, but Rob's been working really in the interagency for several years now and working in CIO and deputy CIO functions, so he understands all the important issues that come from a CIO's perspective as we get into this world of information warfare. He understands the impact of the network. He understands the human resource issues that are associated with that. So again, we have a unique perspective coming from Rob. And next to Rob, we've got Vice Admiral Jan Tighe. Jan certainly got her hands full. She's been doing a lot of things over the years and brings with her great experience as well. She was a former commander of the United States Fleet Cyber Command and 10th Fleet. She was also had assignments at PAC Fleet and the Naval Security Group, the Naval Network Warfare Command. She served again, so this theme of cyber plays strongly in this panel. She served as a Cyber Command Deputy J3, and currently she is serving as the N2, N6 with the Navy. So she certainly brings a lot of experience in that regard. And next to Admiral Tighe, we have Brigadier General Dennis Crall. He's the Director of Command Control Communications Computers for the Marine Corps and the Chief Information Officer of the Marine Corps. And General Crall is a career aviation command and control system, so he brings a warfighting perspective and integration of the warfighting aspect of this, along with the importance of the network. He's also was the direct air support deployed on the Direct Air Support Center, airborne officer in charge in support of operations in Iraq. He was the Chief Joint Cyberspace Center, United States Central Command. He was the XO to the Deputy Commander down there. He was a division chief in the develops and concepts at CENTCOM. So he certainly understands the technology, understands the cyber side of what's going on, and he understands the importance of being able to take technology, integrate it, but bring a practical approach to what's going forward in this regard. So what I'd like to do is each one of them is going to give you a short introductory of their perspectives from information warfare. Then I may ask a couple questions, and I'm going to turn it over to the audience. What we really want to do with this panel is have an interactive discussion. You know, what are the issues that you see out there? What are the challenges you see? And let you query and challenge this group of senior leaders up here and how they view and what their views are and what their perspectives are from information warfare. So to start off, I'm going to pass it to Admiral Tighe and let Admiral Tighe take the lead here.
Okay, thank you, Bob. The Navy has started on this information warfare journey probably around 2009. It started coming together before that. We called it information dominance at first. So we are clearly in the camp of calling it information warfare now. There is a certain freedom in choosing terms that are not codified in joint doctrine. We saw, and Bob alluded to the fact that joint doctrine has struggled, in my memory, since about 1995 in defining either information warfare, information operations. And I think there's a reason for that, and it is that because it's the integration of differing kinds of capabilities that are related, each service approaches that a little bit differently based on the mission that they have inside of their joint force. And so it makes sense that each service kind of would be looking at information operations from a joint sense or information warfare slightly differently. And so, for the Navy, since about 2009, we've aggregated capabilities under 3 principal pillars. Those pillars are battle space awareness, assured command and control, and integrated fires, and I'll talk a little bit about each of them. For battle space awareness, what we've put together and considered together is our ability to sense, understand, and articulate and be able to predict the maritime environment in a meaningful way in order to support the joint fight. It includes sort of the physical domains from the seafloor to the surface, to the air, to space, understanding the red and blue force dispositions, understanding Mother Nature, the environmental considerations of oceanography and meteorology and space weather, and what that means to the fight. And certainly, it includes the electromagnetic spectrum and cyberspace as domains that we have to be able to sense and understand, both what we are emitting in that space, what we look like from RED's perspective, and how we understand their disposition of the electromagnetic spectrum and cyberspace. So that's the battle space awareness aspect. Of course, it's intelligence. It's our ISR capabilities. It's signals intelligence. It's sensing in the network. It's all of that, and there's a commonality there. We have different skill sets, different communities that are participating in that, but we're thinking about it all together. The second piece of that is the assured command and control. For the Navy to operate forward in an aggregated or disaggregated manner, we have to enable commanders to be able to command and control their forces. And so what is all involved in that? Certainly it's communications, both long haul and short. It is the operations of our networks and the defense of them. It is about managing the spectrum in a way that is beneficial and understanding cyberspace in a way that allows us to fight through whether contested or uncontested in cyberspace in the electromagnetic spectrum. And then the third pillar we call integrated fires. And that's about delivering effects and delivering fires both in the electromagnetic spectrum and in cyberspace, be they the non-kinetic fires of EW and offensive cyber, or making sure that we create the digital fabric and the intelligence and the targeting solutions to allow our kinetic weapons to achieve their full kinematic range through targeting and communications to allow that to happen. So central to our ideas of battle space awareness, command and control, and integrated fires is the idea of maneuvering. It's not a static situation. We've got to be able to maneuver in the electromagnetic spectrum when faced with an adversary. We've got to be able to maneuver in cyberspace. And for some folks, the notion of maneuvering in a network or maneuvering in the electromagnetic spectrum is kind of a new idea. But that has been very much built into the way that fleet forces and fleet operations are working towards, to be able to take the full advantage of the spectrum, knowledge of the spectrum, and take it to the fight. We also have to be able to take advantage of all of our battle space awareness knowledge coming from all aspects of sensing the environment and be able to inform the physical maneuver in the physical domains as well. And so that is a big part of how we are operating information warfare. The way we're defining it right now, and this is certainly subject to change, finding the right words to describe what it means to aggregate those three pillars together and maneuver across them, is the integrated employment of the Navy's information-based capabilities to degrade, deny, deceive, or destroy an enemy's information environment, or to enhance the effectiveness of our own. And so we have, again, organized our expertise around this notion. We are continuing to integrate information warfare into all aspects of maritime warfighting. And you heard Admiral Harris probably yesterday at the luncheon talk about him challenging his various component commanders to be able to deliver effects in other domains other than those that they're traditionally responsible for. With information warfare for the Navy, we make that possible to be able to deliver from any domain that we operate in potentially to any other. So I think we are critical in achieving Admiral Harris's vision there, and we're just very excited to be a part of it and be integrated into the fabric of the Navy in a way that's never been before been fully leveraged. The demand signal for our capabilities and our expertise integrated into the traditional warfighting areas has never been stronger. So in terms of having my hands full, that's the good and the bad news. Much is expected of us, and we have huge opportunities here. Thank you.
General Crall, could you kind of hear what you see from a Marine Corps perspective?
Yes, sir. I'm going to make this simple, like hopefully I always do. You're going to hear, and whether we discuss it here now or you'll discuss it later or during our questions, what may appear to be some disjointed perspectives. And it is, in some cases, because we're learning and we're packaging these really on the move. But I think what I've wrestled with now over the past several years is no matter what you hear, I think these all come down to about 6 categories that we've been able to track. And I imagine I've been hard-pressed to find something that doesn't fit in these, but we'll see. But the first piece is there's no doubt that when you look at what the purpose behind information warfare is, and these 6 categories or areas that we'll probably share, the first one's going to be about assured C2. We've got to make sure that the commanders have the ability to fight with their systems and their networks at our time of choosing. So that assurance is certainly driving most of what we do. The other part that Admiral Tighe just talked about that I couldn't agree with more is the idea of awareness, understanding our information environment, that battle space, is also a key endeavor that we've got to maintain. The other piece is attack and exploit, whether it be networks, systems, or information itself is a mission that you'll find us probably able to bundle and relate to. And then we've got a couple aimed directly at our foreign target audiences. The first one would be influence. Simply understanding the cognitive domain is not enough. You got to do something about it. And the ability to influence our adversaries, and again, in a way of our time and choosing, is critical. The other, it's not a subtlety, but the other distinction would be to deceive. We've got to be able to practice deception. We don't need to be afraid of the word. In fact, I was accused once of someone who was so disturbed by it, they equated it to lying. And spot on. That's exactly what it is. And we've got a long history under the right rule set to do that. And lastly, it would be our ability to control our information activities, capabilities, and resources. Those 6 areas, no matter what you hear today, I got a feeling that DOD is probably going to, and our letter agency friends are probably going to settle around, and how we organize might be a little unique. So that's how I think we see the landscape. The Marine Corps is going through an operational planning endeavor right now to bring this capability to the Marine Corps at the MAGTF level. So the Commandant in his Force 2025 has received authorization in the NDAA to create a new 3-star billet, a new Deputy Commandant for information. And under that information rubric is going to be all the capabilities that we normally used to associate with information operations as a starting point. So when you think of traditional things like MISO, MILDEC, EW, OPSEC, and then adding to that special technical operations, special access programs, and cyber, IO will no longer be the integrator. The integrator is going to be something much bigger. So we're in the midst of organizing ourselves in that direction right now to include upwards of 3,000 new Marines to perform those tasks. Lastly, I would leave you with probably 3 areas that are going to be a challenge to us as we set to define this. And they've been around for a while, but we're going to have to work our government to get a better solution. First of all, the rules don't fit. When you think of traditional areas of hostility, which is great for limiting traditional combat power, ground combat power, it doesn't really fit in the world of cyber, for example. When you're looking at having certain effects in areas that influence the battlefield but may not be located in the traditional geographical boundaries. Cyber is just a perfect test case that doesn't behave like other things do. So when authorities are given to us to execute missions, they're just not a good fit for us. And in fact, in some cases, hamstring our ability to do anything at all. So the rules have to change in order for us to get after it. The second thing that has to change is our workforce. We're trying to change our workforce now, but we're behind. And everybody up on this panel, by the way, is competing for the same person. And others who aren't up on this panel are competing for the same person. And so when it comes to incentives and retention and training and building that quality force, we've got to have that ready. The acquisition would be probably a third area that needs to change. It's too slow, especially in the world of information technology. We can't get there in time to follow the rules that are in place. Maybe, and by the way, I'm not knocking acquisition. They've delivered tremendous things to us over the years. But there has to be a fast track for us to do right, the way Congress would have us do right, to be good stewards of the money that we're given as taxpayers ourselves, but also get after the adversary quickly, because the adversary is not limited by some of those restrictions that we face. I have no doubt we've got the prowess to take it to our enemy. We just don't know if we can match it in speed sometimes, and we've got to work on that a little bit better. And I'd probably throw one more on. Probably the bane of all of it, we don't think of this except those who practice this. My time as a J39 at Central Command taught me one thing. You can plan. Planning is fun. You can put a lot of offensive power into your plans. You can move up to that line of departure and you can execute violently. But at the end of the day, it's going to be about measure of performance and measure of effectiveness. And if you haven't built that into the front end, you'll have no way to make a determination of what you've done. On the kinetic side, we normally do that very well because you can see and you can experience. When a 2,000-pound bomb lands on your command post, you know, and those around you know. And it's normally verifiable on what effect it has. But when you do a cyber operation, for example, and you block and redirect, if you do an influence operation, if you do a deception operation, it's a little more difficult sometimes to determine the effectiveness of what you've done. But we owe it to those who pass the laws and hold us accountable for that to make sure that we have a good system in place and that we're patient to see some of those results. So I'd kind of leave you with, I think, is the 6 bins of how IW is kind of formed up. Hopefully an idea of some of the challenges in those 4 buckets that I've given as well, and what I think we need to move forward to kind of help us be better practitioners of this new budding technology and capability. Thank you.
Okay, so we've heard from the Marine Corps, we've heard from the Navy. I'm going to ask Admiral Lytle to kind of talk about this from a joint perspective.
Thank you, General. It's kind of interesting being here with one of my predecessors as the moderator on the panel. I kind of feel like a student taking a test. I hope I get all the questions right. I won't have to stay after school for remediation later. Jan and Janice went into great detail, had some great comments there. I was managing to check off a bunch of stuff that I was going to talk about because they covered it wonderfully, so I'm going to go a little higher up front here. Modern warfare is no longer bounded by geographic boundaries. Dennis mentioned this. There will always be a battle for territory, but now that battle is prepped, shaped, and executed far beyond the boundaries of any city, any country, or any sound. The conflicts today cross multiple combatant commands, lines on a chart, and domains. General Dunford refers to this as the transregional, all-domain, and multifunctional warfare. This new character of war is driving a whole new level of global integration in joint force planning and execution. This integration is happening horizontally across the COCOMs and vertically through all of the warfare domains. In my semi-J6 biased view, the two basic elements we need for success in this arena are personnel. First one is personnel. Personnel in the joint force who are trained and ready. And the second aspect is communications. If you have people that know what they're doing, the first thing they need to do is communicate. So how do we have assured communications for our folks in the field to work? So what does all this have to do with information warfare? The term may be copyrighted by the Navy, as it is not defined in the joint doctrine anywhere. However, information operations, cyberspace operations, and electronic warfare are fairly clearly defined. The joint force needs not only people who are experts in these areas, but needs personnel who maneuver in and integrate these areas into all of our plans and operations across the full spectrum of conflict. Moving and managing information throughout the joint force is critical. This could be that battle space awareness that Jan was talking about. Assuring the accessibility and accuracy of that information is critical. And the capability to deny our adversaries their information is critical. This should sound familiar with some of the points that Jan and Dennis were making. Capabilities and ConOps in the cyber domain are not quite as mature as they are in the other warfighting domains. We've been doing land warfare for a little bit longer than we've been doing cyber warfare. It's had a little more chance to get ahead of the game. We still have some work to do, though, in order to get to be the agile joint force that we need today to operate in this environment. And this is, when I say joint, I don't mean that in the true joint five-service point of view. That includes coalition and interagency, because we don't go into any fight today as just armed forces. Part of that interaction is with the wide range of U.S. interagency partners we go into a fight, State Department, DHS, et cetera. But it's also we don't go into a fight alone as a country anymore. Our coalition partners. So all this talk we're having about information warfare needs to apply across that space. We need to operate with our partners in any conflict at that same level. I'm really less concerned about what the definition of information warfare is than the fact that we engage in, we master, and we integrate those elements that we're talking about as part of information warfare into all our planning and execution of warfare today. Really looking forward to the discussion we're going to have this morning. Thank you.
Rob, I'm going to ask you to speak next.
Thank you, sir. Am I on? So, information warfare from the Department of Navy, CIO, the interest as it relates to warfare is covered by General Crall and Admiral Tighe from the Navy's perspective. Where I play a role is in the policy, and we had a couple of conversations about people. So one of the areas that we're working on, specifically in the component of cyber, is working on how to do cyber workforce, and that has a couple of components. So there was a talent war discussion earlier about trying to find that right person. There's also a component of training that right person. And so we have worked with the Marine Corps and the Navy, and we've come up with the Secretary of the Navy's instruction on cybersecurity workforce. And what we're trying to do there is get people qualified from their jobs as well as their certification programs that they have. And that allows us to keep these people engaged in the right mission and also have some career path so that we don't have to pigeonhole them and wait for a training opportunity. It saves us some money. It also keeps people more interested in their career progression. Again, that's on the civilian side. So I'm looking at it from a cybersecurity workforce perspective, putting a lot of energy around how to get that done, and then the recruit, retain, and reward piece of that from a departmental perspective, how we can do that the most flexible opportunities so that we can essentially poach faster than those that are poaching from us. So that's an important aspect. The other area, other than workforce, that I have under my umbrella would be the strategic spectrum. So under my office, and we have the Navy and the Marine Corps has systems that operate in spectrum as described earlier, but there's a spectrum reallocation fund, there's spectrum that's being sold, and so we report and work with NTIA, we report and work with FCC, we talk with the Department of Defense, so we represent the services on the weapon systems, the spectrum that's being operated, and we work the long game because this is something similar to cyber, that it doesn't have geographic boundaries. So we have to have it available where we're going to fight and train, and in some cases that's 198 nations that have a vote on that. So that's a very long game when it comes to strategic spectrum. And then the reallocation of that, i.e. the funding that comes from the sale, has to work with the weapon systems to be migrated or shared in those operational areas of that spectrum that is being sold. So those are two areas, spectrum being one and workforce or the other, at the Department of the Navy that I'm kind of focused on. Thank you.
Admiral Becker, he comes to this with a very interesting perspective. He probably looks at it from a space perspective and an EW perspective, and then certainly from an acquisition perspective. So it's kind of a diverse way of looking at things. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, General. Good morning. Again, thanks to AFCEA for putting this panel together and to U.S. Naval Institute for bringing us all here. But also thanks to you all for attending, because that's what makes this event such a successful event for our community and for sharpening the edge for our warfighters in information warfare and beyond. I'd like to take a little kind of twist on the topic and combine it with the theme of ready for today and modernizing for tomorrow. Because in the world of information warfare, as has been stated earlier, our capabilities live in a life cycle that is far inside the normal timelines for acquisition and for delivery and even for sustainment. It's moving very rapidly. So if you combine those two, you pretty quickly come to the conclusion that modernizing for tomorrow is indeed about readiness for today. And that's our path to get there. I'm also glad that we went in reverse alphabetical order, so I got my shipmates here to make a lot of great points ahead of me. And as we say in the space business, it's great to be number one, but not first. Oh, you actually were awake out there. By the way, there are about 36 seats scattered around here. For those of you in the back that are hanging out back there, there's plenty of room, and I'm sure your colleagues would make space for you. Just saying. When we talk about information warfare and the areas and the disciplines you heard earlier, I got to say that my PEOs, well, at least my PEOs for the next 48 hours, are all about warfighting readiness and information warfare and addressing the three pillars that Admiral Tighe discussed. But that readiness is critical and critically enabled by modernization. And if you look at the programs we have today, that you can see it across the programs. If you look at MUOS, our narrowband UHF capability, we're modernizing our UHF capability, but at the same time, those spacecraft still maintain the legacy UHF payloads, even as we introduce new capability with a WCDMA payload that will give us a far-reaching capability across the globe for new applications and new ways to fight in that domain. If you look at our SSEE program, modernizing out of increment E, which is difficult to maintain, and increasing that readiness by moving on to the next increment, or increment F. There are examples across the board like that are driven on our timeline. But that information fight is also in the very operating environment we use in our networks. And Windows 10 and in particular the business model of Windows 10 with the releases that will come on about a 6-month center, that's going to drive a significant change. It has to drive a significant change in how we acquire and how we deliver our IT-based capability. The network is a warfighting platform. Let's say that again. The network is a warfighting platform. And if there's anyone that doesn't understand that in this room, I'd be very surprised. Well, what's not surprising, or is in fact very heartening, is that the leaders of our Navy and the Marine Corps have stated very clearly that the network is a warfighting platform, and so we have to treat it that way and keep it at a very sharp edge. With Windows 10 and that change, we're going to have to change how we acquire capabilities and keep them current. You can help us with that. Because fundamentally, that warfighting platform is going to enable us to exercise sea control, to exercise maneuver, to exercise and deliver distributed lethality. All of those concepts are based on winning in the information fight. We have to think differently, though. We have to think differently about this fight. Because if we don't, we'll wind up like others who failed to think differently. I was at Pac Fleet last week or 2 weeks ago, and outside one of the buildings are two 18.1-inch shells. Anybody can guess where they came from? The clue is 18.1 inches. Only ship in the world that ever fired a shell that large was the Yamato, the largest battleship ever built. 3,200 pounds, each one of those things. On April 7, 1945, she went to the bottom. And whither went battleship warfare? How are we not going to let that happen to us? What are you going to do to help us not be in that fight? The general mentioned that I was at a weapons school, and one of the privileges and one of the fun parts of standing up at a command is you get to shape the patch. Si eram moderaris vincus was the motto we gave the weapons school for the electronic warfare weapons school. Loosely translated, it means if you control that space between things, you win. The implication being if you don't, you lose. Si eram moderaris vincus. We're here today to figure out how to get that vincus. Looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to throw a couple questions out there. The first one I'm going to give to Admiral Lytle. As I've looked at the different philosophies or the concepts that are evolving from the services, it looks like there are being different approaches that are taking. So from a joint perspective, so that you're able to deliver capabilities to the combatant commander and the JTF that are going to be demanded in this environment, can you give us a little insight on what the process is or will be as you see it to make sure that we've got some type of an integrated approach from a joint perspective?
Yeah, we're still working through that process, obviously. As the services focus on how they deliver those capabilities within their pieces of the warfighting team, how do we integrate that? And we're looking at a lot of areas at the high level across the joint force, across the DoD, is how do we work together on a daily basis? How do we integrate our information, how we integrate our battle space awareness on a daily basis? When we get to the fight, it's there. So you look at the information systems world, things like JIE and the mission partner environment. How do we integrate with our partners in the coalition on an enduring process to exchange information and awareness in C2? But also how do we do it on an episodic level? How do we stand up a JTF that involves our coalition partners and put in an environment out there quickly that they can all join and share that awareness and share that battle space knowledge of what's going on so they can get to the fight? And how do we defend that? How do we defend that? We're going through some exercise series now with rolling out an MPE environment in a joint battle environment all the way down to the tactical level and joint fires. But how do we defend that in a coalition manner? So we're going through a series of exercises to tease that out, but we're also looking to push systems and standards that allow us to interoperate on a regular basis to have that shared awareness. Cybercom is working on C2 for cyberspace. How do we defend our systems? What's the ConOps for defense of our DoD systems? And what's the ConOps for how we do offensive cyber operations? And how do we try those out? I think Dennis touched on it a little bit in terms of, do we have the right authorities and processes to execute operations in cyberspace? And the answer to that today is no, we don't. So what do we need? How do we work with the lawmakers and the authorities to get that out down to the battlefield, down to the decision maker, to have that stuff executed quickly? Given the fact that in our current environment, whereas you also mentioned, yeah, if you drop a 2,000-pound bomb on a C2 node, you pretty much know what happens. And it's pretty clear, and the BDA is relatively contained to the radius of the impact. Cyberspace, okay, you're going out for an impact, you're going to do something. What is the effect? Sure, you're going for a first-order effect, but there's second, third, and fourth-order effects depending on how you execute that cyberspace operation that now start to wrap in other agencies, other countries, and you have to work through that method and work through that process. So we're trying to develop that so we can be more agile in this cyberspace.
I want to point out we've got 2 microphones on the side here, so I'm going to keep my eye on those. So I'm going to ask you to come on up if you got a question so you can engage the panel here. Well, we've got a couple takers already, so I'll keep my mouth shut and move on. Yes, sir.
Good morning. I want to thank you all for participating in the panel, and I'm encouraged. I'm a retired SWO. I'm encouraged at the trajectory that you guys are taking information warfare. And I'm reminded, Admiral Becker, you are a great historian, and early in our Navy's history, there was this new sensor thing that came out, but it was just a sensor, and it was used for helping those battleships work better. It was called an airplane. And eventually, visionary leaders in that community inspired their people and generated a real understanding of that domain. And today, aviation officers compose the single largest officer community in the United States Navy. So I guess my question to you all is, as you're defining what information warfare is, do you truly have an understanding that it is a warfare domain, and you guys are warriors, and you're line officers to be in the same sense that the aviation guys in the 1920s, 1930s were? So what's your sense of the trajectory that information warfare is going? Are you guys eventually a line community?
Well, I would point out that we are a line community already. I think what you mean is unrestricted line. There you go. One of my favorite questions. I would say to answer your first question, which is, do you get that you're warriors? I would say yes, we do. We get that we are. I think more importantly, all of the warfare areas that we work with get that as well. And so some of the heavy lifting that has gone on sort of behind the scenes, to the rest of the Navy is building that culture among the different disciplines that make up the information warfare community, starting with meteorological and oceanography community, moving into cryptologic warfare, intelligence, information professionals, and the space cadre, really. We all come from slightly different cultures, but recognizing that we're building a culture together that creates a capability for the Navy that's bigger than the individual disciplines that we would have brought before individually. And so we all, it's been a different journey for each of the different communities. And I think what we have spent time in doing is trying to create that culture through initial officer accession training together, and then developing the expertise in the various communities. Having a mid-career course whereby we get back together again, understand how we can leverage each other's capabilities to bring something more to the Navy. We have a senior leader seminar. We've recently established a flag officer training symposium, just like every other warfare area. We participate in I went to SWOFOTS this year to represent IW. I brought all the other, the Air Boss and Sub 4 and the SWO Boss to our training symposium to make sure that all the warfare areas are understanding how we are evolving and how we integrate in, and putting that front and center so that we can fully capture the power of what we bring to the fight. we are doing things, and most recently, we have created a post-major command board that screens for the information warfare commander for the carrier strike group commands. So over time, that position has migrated and morphed and kind of been individualized by the carrier strike group commanders. You know, is it the CO of the carrier? Is it the N6? You know, over time, nobody was building that warfare commander. We are building those warfare commanders now. We're screening post-major command 06s to go serve in that position. So we have the first screened commander out on Bush right now. And we're very excited about the results as they come back, and we're going to continue. So that's warfare command at sea. And so we're going to continue to press on and deliver the value, regardless of the color of the flag or whether we are redesignated unrestricted line, deliver the value of what we are capable of delivering, you know, to the fight. And I think that's the best I can answer that one.
General Crall, you got anything you want to add to that? You mentioned the NDAA brought a new position, perhaps, into the Marine Corps.
Yes, sir. I think the proof in the pudding is going to be how those individuals are accepted, promoted, and lead. So I agree with Admiral Tighe that we've created the right structure, and I'm very optimistic that we'll get there. But I will say that there's still an institutional hesitancy across all DoD to rely on this type of warfare compared to others if you put them side by side. I've done far more planning for information-related operations that never went forward than I've done planning for other areas that did go forward. So I know we plan. I think we've got the right sight picture, but I think it's going to take some time. And part of that, though, is what we've already covered. It's very difficult to get to the party on time. So if you look at planning side by side for a kinetic strike and you've got your information warfare planners right next to you, in some cases the procedure that you go through to get operations approved don't match the speed of other initiatives. And so you'll find more traditional initiatives ready when you're not ready because of the authority issue that you're facing. The other aspect is, for most of what we describe here, requires a lot of left of phase zero planning. Mm-hmm. When you start thinking about the influence operations, whether it be deception or what would be traditional MISO, you can't just show up at the table and say, I think we'll start that today. There are deliverables that the adversary has to see and has to process that in his cognitive space, then to act. So that's another reason why it tends to lag. The reason I share that is that also decreases confidence in those who would adopt some of this. So I think we're doing the right things. I've sat on a lot of promotion boards. We've promoted a lot of good people in tracks that no one seems to understand because they're budding. And so I'm hopeful that eventually we'll get there where it's as respected and as utilized as the more traditional fields that we're familiar with.
Good morning. Craig Madsen, former surface warfare officer, now over at Space and Naval Warfare Systems Command. Back in 1989, the Navy, I think it was 89, the Navy and the Air Force both responded to the Philippine coup. There were issues with that where we had blue-on-blue engagements cleared to fire that actually didn't occur. So in response to that, PACOM created a deployable joint task force augmentation cell to be able to work that joint fight. Now, both Air Force and Navy have cyber capabilities. We also have agencies involved like NSA, DISA, and so on. Do we have organizational activities to support this new cyber reality? My question is, how would information warfare work for a projected major combat operation? Do we have a modern national level or DoD level equivalent to the PACOM deployable joint task force augmentation cell?
Well, our cyber mission force is aligned under the OPCON of Cybercom, but they have specific teams that are aligned to the various COCOMs. So we have specific units that are aligned to the combatant commands that are in support of those combatant commands and following those combatant command priorities. So you won't see an event where you have a Navy and a Marine cyber operations team or cyber mission team going against a target somewhere in blue on blue because each of those is assigned to different combatant commands, and that's all pre-sorted out ahead of time. So we've tried to set that up in advance of that operation to get that going. But as is mentioned several other times already, the challenge becomes with the authorities and operating that space. And you tapped on it. There's other agencies, there's other entities operating in cyberspace. In the ground war, you can kind of see people running around. You can kind of tell where they're from. In a cyberspace event, you see bits and bytes coming around. And you don't know if those are coming from one of your partner countries, adversary countries, some other agency with your own country. And you have to deconflict that ahead of time as much as you can. But to some extent, you have to operate in that environment. The analogy has been used before, but cyber warfare is not like football. You don't have a defensive team and an offensive team, and the offense is going against the adversary's defense, and those are separate plays. A soccer analogy has been used. Okay, great. You have a bunch of defensive and offensive people on the field at the same time. Yeah, that's not really right either, because actually cyber warfare is a soccer game with all the fans on the field with you. With all the fans on the field with you. So you got the two teams trying to fight, try to win, but all the fans are mixed in amongst you, and you don't know who's who. Nobody's wearing uniforms, but you're trying to get that mission accomplished. It's a very complicated environment that we do have to focus on how do we avoid that blue on blue and how do we get to the target successfully.
Good morning, Brad Peniston with Defense One. We heard from General Crall and others today about the need to speed up acquisition. We heard similar from Admiral Gilday and others yesterday. I'd like to hear from the panel what specifically needs to change in the requirements process and the acquisition process to help you folks do your job.
Why don't you take that?
Well, if Admiral Tighe could just cut me a bigger check, I'm sure I could move a whole lot faster. But short of that, operating within the authorities that exist today, we can go faster, and we're using the entire width of the road. As an example, I'll cite IT box, and if this gets a little too techno-jargon for you, we'll take it offline, but the IT box acquisition strategy allows us to work with the end user community in adjusting requirements in a rapid process so that as we move through the development of a capability, and in particular with software-based capabilities, we can make adjustments in how we view the requirements in order to stay on step and deliver capabilities. Those authorities and those acquisition models exist today. Implementing them at times is perhaps part of a learning process as organizations that are used to large-scale military defense acquisition programs, MDAPs, and providing the oversight and asking for the insight that goes along with those large-scale, long-duration programs, adjust to this notion of we're moving much, much faster. What should testing look like? What should oversight look like as you are moving in a much more agile way, and perhaps even using agile with a capital A, software development processes?
One of the things I'd like to throw in here, just in my experience anyway, when you look at the size of the force, unless it's going to be a software-based solution, but when you look at the size of the force, and you, particularly naval forces, and you come to understand that they have to cross separate combatant commanders' areas of responsibility, trying to install that capability and as well as to train the force can take some time too. That is something I think that is underappreciated from the time you get a ship, regardless of the type of ship it is. By the time you get them in their prepared to sail phase and the operational phase, getting to where they have to go, and how do you synchronize those capabilities across combatant commanders and then within the services, I think that's underappreciated in that challenge, and that's where software may come in and help us.
From the requirements perspective, just let me chime in here real quick. I think we do have to we have to operate differently than we've been operating in the past, and particularly for the types of things that we're involved in. creating some model-based systems engineering to inform the requirements that we put in, on the front end of the gonculator that spits out an acquisition is something that we're working pretty hard to better inform our requirements officers on what does good system engineering look like to be able to describe their requirement, but also what's the effect of making decisions when Boris wants a big check from me. Okay, I'm going to take money out of that pot. What did that money coming out of that pot do to all of the connected, interfaced systems that may be out there that were depending on me delivering on time on that particular area where I've taken the money from? So we're going to better equip our requirements officers with some model-based system engineering tool that's going to draw from the systems commands and better inform. That's part A. The other part of it is, though, particularly in the areas that we're talking about where we need to move much more quickly, we've got to be better focused on the end user and include those users in the iterative process with the designers, with the developers, to make sure we're heading in the right direction. And that's agile. That's some of the agile design thinking to get after what is the problem we're trying to solve with this acquisition, and how do we iterate, because by the time we deliver, especially if it's a lengthy delivery process, love to make it shorter, but if it's a lengthy delivery process, in the information warfare realm, the target has moved on, the problem has moved on, so how do we keep connected with the end user in mind, whoever that operator is, whoever even if it's, a financial specialist, okay, let's make sure that we're actually delivering what they need. That's just, taking good industry practices and applying it to the industrial mechanism that we have been in the past, moving us forward more into digital approaches to solving our own problems.
Go ahead.
If I could add just one other thing on that, and you said industry best practices, and that's a key. We as the department need to look, obviously for weapon systems, we're going to have some particular requirements that we need to do, but we need to get out of the government-specific requirement stuff and into the commercial off-the-shelf world a lot more, so that we can go out and just acquire something that's already available, because industry is driving where much of the market is today. And if some of this particular security stuff is good enough for the financial industry and the health industry, and if we're working toward that, can we use it within government as is without modifying the heck out of it so that it doesn't look like the original product anymore, and now it's very, very difficult, if not impossible to support. But by going to common commercial solutions, we also kind of build in standards, which gets to the point about, hey, when Combatant Command A is doing something and Combatant Command B is doing something that looks similar, if they're using different solutions, then how do we get to that global integration? How does Navy ship A get prepped for deployment and go into Combatant Command A's AOR and is good to go, but then it gets redeployed to Combatant Command B, and oops, they're using a different system? We cannot have that rethink going every time. We have to drive to a more commercial off-the-shelf software environment for much of our basic stuff, obviously with the caveat that mission and weapon systems get a little bit different, but I don't think we do commercial weapon systems very often.
I'll come back to you in just a minute, but I got a question for Mr. Foster. One of the, probably one of the more complex areas and least understood is the issue of RF spectrum. Can you just expand a little bit on your comment earlier about spectrum and, and the implications of that, where it's a national resource, and not only that, but when you're launching space systems, it comes into play there as well. And can you talk about that just a little bit?
Absolutely. If I could have 30 seconds just to
Okay.
follow up on Admiral Lytle. I think the hybrid solution, buying commercial, is absolutely appropriate. One of the things we have, because of the Department of Defense, Department of Navy scale and scope is so large, then you have a dollar threshold. That dollar threshold kicks it into a program of record, even if you're buying something that's, quite frankly, a commercial item. So that program of record then causes some level of heavy governance in my mind. And so I think we have to deconstruct what is IT, what is the purchase, what is the volume, and maybe have a lightweight governance. And I think people are working on that. But being a program manager in the past, it's a very lengthy process, and everybody at whatever gate review has some level of veto, which causes a lot of churn, which leads to a delivery model that is quite slow. So that's kind of a follow-up on that one. As it relates to the spectrum, I've had the opportunity, again, when I came here, I didn't really realize how pervasive it was and what it essentially was ubiquitous. It's everywhere but nowhere, and everybody owns it but nobody owns it. And so I had an opportunity to work with the Worldwide Radio Conference, and again, I think there was 198 countries, all that were involved. Some of them are specific countries, some of them are connected with CTEL, which would be United States and North America and Central and South America. So people have votes, and they vote certain ways on what they want to do as it relates to the spectrum, the allocation, the sale, the usage. And so where we want to train locally, we may or may not be able to operate based on where that spectrum is and how it's being allocated. So my challenge, or our challenge, I think, is to have weapon systems that have some flexibility, and heretofore they have not been designed that way. They've been locked into a specific kind of a spectrum, and the technology is there and pushing towards, maybe a little bit more flexibility as we move across those domains. But my observation is it moves very slow. I think there's an appetite for industry to sell off some of the spectrum that we need to operate in. And I think that there's a big challenge with an international consortium, if you will, to get our position as it relates to the Department of Defense when you're competing against the commercial sector. So,
Thank you. Next question.
Yes, this is for Admiral Tighe, but also maybe General Crall also can talk to it. In the old days, in my days, a lot of the officers in the communities, the individual specialties within your community were lateral transfers from the line communities. Now, some people think that maybe you should be focusing on new accessions because these people are not current or bring in preconceived notions or not geeky enough or something like that. How would you talk about how utilizing these lateral transfers, are they of value? What percentage are they, and what do you see for them? And then I also have to add, because this Naval Institute conference, how would you respond to the proceedings articles that say Intel is not a good fit in the N6? Perhaps it should be in the N5 or J5 because it's mostly analysis, not information. Thanks.
Okay, I'll start, Dennis, and then you can go next. With respect to, I don't know that I can quote the amount of lateral transfers that we have in the community. I'm sorry, where'd you go? I was trying to get eye contact. There we go. I don't know that I have the number. For all of our communities, we have shifted, to some degree. Each community is a little bit different based on the requirements that we have at the 01 to 03 level. But for example, for Intel and for cryptology, we've always had direct accessions, into and taken lateral transfers. So it's a combination for METOC and for IPs. Initially, all lateral transfers. IP is moving closer into having direct accessions. We have direct accessions for them today. So in my view, because we're so integrated into, warfighting and into the fleet, we get those experiences within our warfare area. I think that's a better way to grow, information warriors. Not that we don't still have requirements for lateral transfers and have the opportunity for that, and we've valued that over the years. To the degree that we can build our warfare area from the ground up, all the better. With respect to your second question, again, we don't have the 2 and the 6. I'm a cryptologic warfare officer, right? So, or was. Now I'm an information warfare officer. But the point is, it's the combination of the two, and our ability to leverage each other's capabilities. You would be surprised at the amount of collaboration going on, for example, across Fleet Cyber Command, ONI, and we have Admiral Sharp up in the front row, and our CENMOC, our meteorological oceanography team. There is a lot of commonality in how you sense, how we move data, and so the benefits that the Navy achieves by having us all growing up together, thinking about how we can leverage each other is just far, far superior to that which we could have done by ourselves. So we have believers. That doesn't mean everyone is a believer. We are still working on some of those things. But we are, I think, able to deliver, and the demand, like I said, is coming in greater and greater. If you look at the fleet design coming out of Admiral Davidson, and I'm sure he'll talk about it today, the types of things he needs from us isn't coming from single communities. It's coming from the combination. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
I'll just add a couple things to that is, our answer to getting after this high demand, low density skill set is going to be yes. We're going to look through all kinds of ways. There are advantages to grow people from the onset into these communities because they'll have the experience. There's some advantages of moving people in because they have an operational focus before doing it. We have communities that do both now. But what we're going to have to do better at is going to find talent where we traditionally don't get it. So I think one of the examples that we look at is all the services utilize a commissioning program, for example, a little bit differently for some lawyers. Certainly the Navy looks at a different commissioning program for doctors, where they come in at a higher pay grade with that skill set already behind them. I meet a lot of people in my travels who are professionals, who have advanced degrees in cyber engineering, who want to be Marines. But the prospect of starting as a second lieutenant isn't really the career path they were looking at. So bringing them in a little more senior, and same for the enlisted ranks, is something that we have to look at. There's a ton of talent. The other bit of talent, we've got to do a better job of tapping into our reserves. I've got reservists who are doing phenomenal things in industry right now and in their civilian jobs, and I find them, and we bring them on active duty to do great things in extended active duty. So the idea that we're all competing for these people is critical. On the intel side, in the Marine Corps Deputy Commandant for Information construct, we are pulling the Director of Intelligence under that umbrella or inside of that tent. So to answer your question, do you think it fits? Is it a good idea? Well, no, we'll let you know, right? We think it is, otherwise we probably wouldn't do it. But here's what they offer that's kind of neat. All of these influence and information-related opportunities to include some of the cyber operations. When you start looking at where access is placed and how to pull some of these things off, the intel community does really three things for us, right? It senses, it makes sense of the environment, and then it acts. Those are three things it does. I find that we're pretty good on both ends. We have a lot of sensors on the battlefield, and we pull a lot of raw information together. We also know how to act. What we don't really know how to do in the middle and is wading through this to make sense of what we're seeing, especially in a timely manner. So to bring those communities together, whether they'll eventually fit, maybe 2 or 3 years from now, we'll be looking at this and the answer might be no. But certainly the integration of those activities belong joined at the hip, no matter how they're organized. So we've got to move a lot closer. And the last piece I'll say are the systems that we use. We've got to plan for them better because they all ride on the same system. There's only a few networks that are out there. We don't have its own intelligent network and its own capacity at times. We're going to share that. So the closer we can get with our intelligence community, the better off we're going to be.
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning, Lieutenant Owen Brooks. I enjoyed the analogy that IW is a lot like soccer and less like the game of football with an offense and defense. But my question is about security of our networks. And are we looking too much at looking at the security of our networks in a anti-access area denial kind of fashion? Or would we be better off looking at a lure and trap kind of model where we, like the General spoke about deception, anticipating that we could let an adversary into our network with the intent to maltrain his algorithm and deceive in that sort of way? Are we looking at operations like that?
Yeah, I'd like to take that one. That's exciting. All right. So because of the classification here, we're not going to be able to answer that directly, right? But if I were to venture an answer, I'd say yes.
Yes, all of the above.
Okay, that those things are certainly planned for. And I think one of the interesting habits we have to untrain ourselves from, when we look at things from a defensive perspective, when you find an intrusion on your network, the distinctive reaction is to block and wipe, right? Anyone who does this for a living knows you can almost not contain yourself. You see it, you've got to block it, you've got to wipe it, and you've got to get rid of it. I like adding an exploitation step to that personally, right? Adversaries who troll our walls ought to have something sent home with them as a reminder not to do that. Just my own personal opinion, right? So decomposing those, reconstructing those, and pushing those back out so the adversary is unaware of what has happened until maybe those networks, those adversarial networks are illuminated, is certainly an activity that I am confident that skill set's there, the authorities are there, and I imagine that those who do this for a living probably do that. But extending that down to something lower than the national teams would be very helpful. Having the skill set to hunt on our networks is unique. It's expensive. It requires a lot of training. You find sloppy people, but you don't often find people who know how to do this right. And the last thing an enemy wants to do is expose zero-day tools or expose the access that they have worked very hard to create. So you can inflict a cost if you're willing to do so.
I take a swing at that from an acquisition perspective. Today we have lots of mandates. You will put this joint tool. You will do this, take this joint approach. Lots of mandates that cover the same tool that everyone's going to buy. Yet, as you walk around the floor out here, a lot of you all are coming up with how to adapt existing capabilities that the Admiral said are commercial capabilities that are out there. And while this tool may not do all the stuff that HBSS does or that this does or that does, it might do a lot of it. And if I put it with this one, it might do them all. And in fact, it might do them all better. But because of some of the restrictions that Mr. Foster mentioned, where you can't go fast because suddenly you're in an ACAT 1 program acquisition, we don't have the opportunity to take advantage of those opportunities. So I think the answer to your question there, Shipmate, is that not only did you get the answers from the General, but we've got to figure out how to be more rapid in our ability to choose the capabilities that we use to defend our network actively, and move less as a mandate-driven organization and rather as a much more flexible and aggressive organization to put those tools in place.
Okay, I'm sorry, but we got time for one more question. I apologize for those of you standing in the queue there, but maybe you can grab the panel members after. Next question, last question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all very much for your time and your remarks. Colin Crawford, Avatar Partners. From a perspective of a former simple-minded operator, I was in the FDNF and then also operational testing for Super Hornets and Growlers. Currently, we're building and developing and operating robust networks for integrated fires. At the same time, deployed forces are struggling with dial-up connections, trying to pass data and communications. How are we able to kind of use our lessons learned or improved access, also improvements across all spectrums and domains, because if we fail at basic communication, we're never going to be able to put network-enabled weapons on target on time.
I think that's a great question. I don't think there's anything simple about testing Hornets, but I take your humility and I appreciate it. I think the answer to that, again, some of the power of bringing sort of that battle space awareness together with command and control, together with integrated fires, is even from the beginning, at the requirements level and how we're funding things, we're able to consider all three of those things together, right? As opposed to in days gone by, when we bought weapon systems, assuming we'd have all the battle space awareness we would need to be able to target, those weapons and all of the bandwidth we would need to be able to do command and control, of those weapons and get updated targeting to them, right? So now you kind of have your super ego conscience looking at it from all angles as we go through the requirements phase. So getting to a better place in terms of getting the requirement right and not tricking ourselves into believing, well, I'm going to assume those pieces away, and then push comes to shove and it turns out, well, nobody ever accounted for, the particular data that we needed to make this particular aircraft work. So, as we move forward, the other aspects of that is really understanding where we have the data distributed and what needs to move. how much bandwidth do we really need to do effective command and control or to share situational awareness when we all may have a similar bit of situational awareness and you only need to send little bits of information across potentially a denied or degraded environment. And so I think building some of that, again, we're getting back to the model-based systems engineering, building some of that knowledge into our decision making as we go forward, I think is a critical piece. Now, let's face it, in our communications domain, we are continuing to increase and improve upon those communication systems that we have out there. But all of that being said, as we get into fights and we're operating in a denied degraded environment, how we maneuver in that space to find alternate paths and how we economize what needs to be shared and passed to be effective in warfighting, is another aspect of that. I hope that answers your question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the panel members. It's pretty clear by the cue that, as it started to build, we could have been here a lot longer. So, again, thank you for your questions, and thank you for what you're doing here.
Let's give the panel a hand, please. Well, I found it quite remarkable that this was not a panel that suffered an enormous amount of techno-speak. This was a panel that talked about warfighting. Appreciate the question that came in as to how they're training, how they're forming, and how they're acting in support of the mission and the commands. Pretty remarkable and a great presentation today. We have some gifts for them. I'd like to thank, once again, HPE and Intel, but we have a book written by Martin Libicki, who from the USNI Press, and the title of the book is Cyberspace in Peace and War. And with great due respect for Mr. Libicki, the panel here is probably writing the chapters right before us. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, please give a hand to our panel and look forward to seeing you at lunch.